We are launching into a deep dive on a book that is, well, it's deceptively one of the most intellectually complex and emotionally challenging works of literature ever marketed to children.
Okay, deceptively is the perfect word there.
We are talking, of course, about Charlotte's Web, but aren't here today to talk about, gentle barnyard tales.
No.
We're here to talk about E.B. White, the formidable literary architect, the co-author of The Elements of Style. I mean, that revered, concise Bible for clear, elegant expression.
The book every writer has on their shelf.
Exactly. And a staff writer for The New Yorker for, what, over 3 decades?
That juxtaposition is really the most important part of this whole dive. The E.B. White most people forget existed was a sophisticated, urbane intellectual. He was at the absolute zenith of American letters.
Right.
Yet this is the man who chose to step away from the cocktail parties and the satirical New York commentary to write a story about a pig and a spider.
In a dilapidated barn in Maine.
A barn in Maine. And this wasn't some whimsical deviation. This was a profound, life-altering commitment.
And here's the core mission for us today. To really dig into the truly radical, I would even say controversial, story behind Charlotte's Web.
It was incredibly controversial.
This book, which, I mean, we now view as an absolute cornerstone of childhood literature, it almost never saw the light of day, at least not in its final form.
That's right.
And why? Because the editor, a very famous editor, Ursula Nordstrom, believed the central, unflinching emotional event, the death of the main character, would spark a literal revolt among parents and educators.
A revolt. She was terrified. And the book's power lies not in its sweetness, but in its brutal honesty.
So what's our one-sentence thesis? The one that brings all this material into sharp focus for today.
Okay, here it is. Charlotte's Web predicted modern arguments about childhood emotional resilience 70 years ago. It proved, emphatically, that children are capable of handling life's hardest, most universal truth, that death is natural, but that love, sacrifice, and the enduring power of memory, they transcend the finite span of life.
Wait, okay, let me stop you there because that's a huge claim. A barnyard story from 1952 predicted modern debates we're having right now about things like content warnings and emotional safety.
It seems like a stretch, I know.
How specifically does that prediction manifest in the sources?
It manifests because White went through the exact same cultural pressure cooker we see today. It was this intense anxiety from adults to protect the so-called innocence of children from difficult subjects.
So they wanted him to change the ending.
Oh, absolutely. He was pressured to write a saccharine, a happy ending where the spider maybe just flies away on a balloon or hibernates.
Something neat and tidy?
Completely tidy. And White refused. His stand was essentially to shield a child from the reality of the life cycle is to lie to them about existence itself.
So the conversation he started back then?
The cultural conversation he instigated about what children can handle versus what adults think they can handle. It's identical to the one we're having right now.
Okay, that clarifies our stakes significantly.
Yeah.
We've got a fascinating stack of sources here. They detail White's personal journey, his meticulous, almost academic research into spiders, the very rigid context of 1952 children's literature, and the whole controversy that followed. So let's unpack this journey. Let's go into the barn. It's absolutely vital, I think, that we establish who Ellen Brooks White E.B. White was before he ever conceived of Wilbur and Charlotte.
Yes, before the farm.
Because we're talking about one of the most admired writers of his generation, celebrated not for fiction, but for his elegant, precise essays.
Correct. For 3 decades, he was a pillar of the New Yorker. I mean, his essays were models of concise expression. They often dealt with these really complex ideas, political freedoms, the absurdity of urban life, or these deeply felt reflections on nature and democracy.
And then, of course, you have The Elements of Style.
The Elements of Style, which he didn't write from scratch, but he co-authored and popularized. It's a book that demands intellectual rigor and, above all else, clarity. His entire literary identity was defined by that kind of sophistication.
I can only imagine the reaction from his peers when he announced this project. Just sort of a bewildered amusement. E.B. White, the great stylist, is writing about a pig.
Puzzled is a massive understatement.
Yeah.
They saw it as this strange career detour, maybe a novelty, a little side project.
Not serious work.
Not at all. They expected him to retire into these gentlemanly literary pursuits, not to become a serious amateur farmer. The idea that a children's book about farm animals would become his defining work, surpassing the fame of The Elements of Style, was, well, it was completely inconceivable at the time.
So why the pivot? What happened? The sources all point to this profound personal transformation that really began in 1938.
That's the year. He purchased a small, aging farm in North Brooklyn, Maine. And he wasn't just acquiring a summer retreat. This wasn't a vacation home.
No, it was something much deeper.
It was a necessary psychological refuge. He was, by all accounts, burnt out by the relentless intellectual pressure and just the pace of New York City life.
So this shift wasn't a temporary phase. He really embraced it.
He genuinely embraced the rigor of rural existence. I mean, he swapped writing these sophisticated commentaries on cocktail parties for the actual physical labor of mucking out stalls, tending chickens, raising sheep, and this forced intimacy with the life cycles of farm animals. It just fundamentally altered his perception of mortality and existence.
And the physical location of his farm was so crucial. The setting for his masterpiece became the center of his new universe, the barn.
Yes, the barn.
Describe this barn for us, because it's almost another character in the story, isn't it?
It absolutely is. It was an 1890s structure, and in his own notes, he describes it as creaking with age, dusty, dilapidated, yet just infused with life. And to White, it transformed into a kind of cathedral.
A cathedral of life and death.
Exactly. He speaks of the shafts of sunlight, slicing through the cracks in the boards, illuminating the dust motes, and, crucially, the intricate spiderwebs. He refused to sweep them away.
Which most practical farmers would do in a second.
Instantly. Most people view spiderwebs as an inconvenience, right? A sign of neglect.
But White saw artistry.
He saw poetry.
He saw poetry. He recognized the daily, astonishing miracles of engineering and those intricate geometric designs. He started focusing intensely on the small, overlooked creatures.
And this is where we get that wonderful anecdote, the one his wife Catherine recounted, which really details that shift from the urbane intellectual to the barn philosopher.
Yes, the anecdote where she confides in friends, and she's sort of half joking, that she's afraid he's losing his mind.
Right.
Because she found him staring at a large gray spider near the windowsill, utterly silent for 20 minutes, and then he started talking to it.
So she feared he was retreating from reality. But in fact, he was doing the exact opposite. He was engaging with a more profound reality, the dignity and the purpose in the brief, beautiful existence of this tiny creature. He was collecting the data he needed to write his greatest work.
So his eccentric observation wasn't a sign of madness.
No, it was the genesis of literary genius being applied to the natural world. He recognized that the barn, with all its dirt and dust and, smells, was a place of high drama and deep philosophy.
This intense engagement with that natural drama, it leads us directly to the inspiration for Wilbur, and it's rooted in White's own experience of just trying to be a practical farmer. He purchased a spring pig, fully intended for butchering. This was a necessary, normal farm practice for winter sustenance.
And that's a really critical piece of context. White wasn't initially a sentimentalist about this. He was trying to run a farm.
But as the weeks passed,
he grew profoundly attached. The pig had a personality. It would run to greet him. It recognized his footsteps and his voice. And White developed what he later called a feeling of friendship.
So when autumn arrived, bringing with it the time for the inevitable slaughter, he hit a wall.
An emotional impasse. He simply couldn't do it.
Yeah.
He couldn't bring himself to kill a friend, no matter how practical or necessary the act was deemed by all his neighbors.
And what happened to that pig?
That pig lived out its natural life on White's farm, dying peacefully of old age, which was an incredibly rare, almost scandalous outcome for a farm pig at that time.
A pig was a commodity.
It was food. And this act of mercy and compassion, this recognition of the pig's individual worth despite its utility, that became the core inspiration for Wilbur, the pig that needed to be saved.
This emotional connection wasn't entirely new for him either. The sources mention his earlier, much darker essay, Death of a Pig.
That's right. That essay, written years prior, recounted his failed, agonizing attempt to save a sick pig. He detailed the crushing disappointment and the heavy sense of responsibility he felt. It showed he'd been wrestling with the morality of animal husbandry and the weight of mortality long before Charlotte's Web.
So the earlier essay provided the anxiety.
And the experience with the pig he saved provided the mercy and the template for Wilbur's rescue.
Okay, now let's talk about the true literary catalyst, Charlotte, the barn spider. White's fascination turned into this near-scientific obsession with the large gray spider near the pig pen.
He didn't just casually observe it. He became a serious amateur arachnologist, focusing on the species Araneus cavaticus.
That's the one.
He kept these meticulous, detailed notebooks. They were filled with observations about her hunting techniques, her precise web geometry, and how she wrapped her prey. He was determined that the magic of the story would be grounded entirely in biological truth.
That commitment to accuracy is just so surprising for a children's fantasy story. I mean, he went beyond his own observation. He actually contacted entomologists at Cornell University.
Yes, he wrote them letters asking these deeply technical questions.
What kind of questions?
He charmed the professors with his genuine curiosity. He needed to know everything that was scientifically verifiable. What is the mating ritual? How long is their exact lifespan? What happens when they lay their eggs and die? He insisted on photographs, diagrams, scientific papers, the whole 9 yards.
So this wasn't just research for detail. This was research for authenticity.
Absolutely.
Huh.
He wanted Charlotte's actions to be those of a real spider, not a dressed-up human in a carapace.
And that research, it yielded the single most crucial, most radical piece of information that dictated the entire emotional arc of the book.
Exactly. The entomologists confirmed the heartbreaking biological truth. The female barn spider lives for exactly 1 season.
You're on season.
They mate in late summer, they lay their elaborate egg sac in the fall, and they inevitably die with the first hard frost. Their entire beautiful existence is geared toward one final, absolute act of perpetuating their lineage.
So this biological constraint became the unchangeable, controversial core of the story.
It had to be. White knew he couldn't lie about this truth because it was the source of Charlotte's ultimate heroism. Her mortality gave her life its meaning.
So let's frame the story for you, the listener, acknowledging this foundation of biological truth. The non-spoiler overview. It sets the scene. A dilapidated barn in rural New England.
Classic setting.
Wilbur, a spring pig slated for the dinner table, finds an unexpected champion in Charlotte, the intelligent barn spider living in the high rafters. The premise is a race against time. Charlotte promises to save Wilbur from slaughter using her unique skill set.
That's the setup. But to really understand the controversy in White's bravery, we have to address the spoiler section.
Okay, spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't read it.
The major events involve Charlotte spinning these miraculous messages into her webs. Some pig, terrific, radiant, turning Wilbur into a beloved celebrity.
Making him too famous and therefore too indispensable to kill.
Exactly. The climax happens at the county fair, where Wilbur wins a special distinction.
And here is the plot twist. The part that caused all that editorial panic. White refuses to provide the expected, neat Disney ending.
No. Charlotte, exhausted from her efforts, having saved Wilbur, quietly lays her egg sac, containing 514 future spiders, and dies peacefully, alone, at the fairgrounds.
It's the ultimate anticlimax in a children's book context. There's no dramatic villain, no violence, just the inevitability of nature's cycle.
And the interpretation of this ending is so critical. It's not presented as a meaningless tragedy, which is what the editor feared.
Oh, not at all.
It's presented as a natural conclusion of a life lived with purpose. Her death is the ultimate act of friendship and sacrifice, ensuring the survival of her friend and, of course, her children.
And Wilbur, in turn.
He performs his own act of devotion by saving the delicate, precious egg sac and carrying Charlotte's legacy back to the farm. White exchanges the typical happily ever after for a much more profound, realistic life goes on and love endures.
Okay, let's focus now on the cultural environment in 1952 that made this specific ending so explosive. What were the unspoken rules of children's literature then? Why did Ursula Nordstrom, White's editor, genuinely fear a parental revolt?
The norms were incredibly restrictive. It really reflected post-war America's desire for safety and stability. Children's books were meant to be curated environments, safe spaces.
So what did that mean in practice?
It meant animals never died unless they were villains, and even then, their demise was typically, ambiguous. They just disappeared. Death, if it was addressed at all, was sanitized, avoided, or cloaked in metaphor.
Went to a farm upstate.
Exactly that. The prevailing adult philosophy was paternalistic. Young minds must be protected from life's inherent cruelties and harsh realities.
So White's decision wasn't just a stylistic choice. It was an act of literary transgression against the cultural gatekeepers of childhood innocence.
Precisely. And when Nordstrom, who was herself a groundbreaking editor, received the manuscript, our sources confirm her reaction wasn't delight, but mounting dread.
You can almost hear her frantic internal monologue.
She realized White was touching the third rail of publishing. Mortality in a book aimed at 8-year-olds.
I want to know exactly what that editorial anxiety sounded like. Can we draw from the source's description of her communications with him?
The internal memos were desperate. Nordstrom recognized the book was brilliant, but she knew the marketplace would reject the ending. She wrote to him, in essence, demanding a change. E.B., you cannot kill Charlotte. The children will be devastated.
We will be accused of psychological cruelty.
Yes, the parents will demand our heads on a pike. She was battling for the book's commercial life, but White saw it as a battle for its soul.
And White was torn. Our sources indicate he really struggled for months. This wasn't arrogance on his part, it was genuine moral questioning.
It tormented him. He spent long nights pacing the farmhouse, writing in his journal, and his entries reveal this internal ethical dilemma. Am I being cruel to children by showing them that life ends naturally, or—
Am I being cruel by lying to them about the most fundamental truth of existence?
Exactly.
Yeah.
He realized that this kind of censorship wasn't just about what was written, it was about protecting adults from having to have difficult conversations with their kids.
So how did he resolve this? He couldn't rely just on his own feelings.
He performed his own little piece of psychological research. He consulted widely. He wrote to trusted teachers. He interviewed child psychologists, and he spoke directly with children.
And what did he find?
The feedback was astonishingly unifying. Children were far more accepting of death than adults gave them credit for.
Because they weren't sheltered from loss in their real lives. They experienced it constantly. The dead bird on the sidewalk, the deceased family pet, the lost grandparent.
Right. What they lacked was a framework to understand it.
A way to process it.
Exactly. White realized that children craved honesty and context. They needed explanations that anchored the idea of loss within a framework of meaning, purpose, love, and continuity. The adults were the ones projecting their own anxieties onto the book.
So his conclusion was definitive.
He would trust the intellectual and emotional capacity of his young audience. He chose truth over comfort. And that single decision is what makes Charlotte's Web so radical and so enduring.
Okay, moving into the philosophical heart of the book. White uses this simple setting to explore these profound questions. The central dilemma, driven by Charlotte's biological fate, is, what constitutes a meaningful life?
This is where White's precision as an essayist really shines. Charlotte's life is brutally short, just one season, but it is defined by absolute purpose.
The continuation of her species and the salvation of her friend.
Right. White just dismantles the notion that a meaningful life has to be a long one. He posits that a life's worth is measured not in years lived, but in the love and sacrifice offered to others. Her web spinning isn't just a clever gimmick, it's her contribution to the world. It's her act of service.
And that sacrifice is made possible by this powerful, unlikely connection between a pig and a spider. It's friendship that crosses species boundaries.
It's a masterful way to explore loyalty. Wilbur is terrified, and Charlotte, a creature that society deems ugly and dangerous.
Something to be swatted away.
She assumes the role of protector. White uses these creatures to explore the concept of pure altruistic devotion, breaking down our artificial distinctions between creatures we love and creatures we fear. The book is ultimately a meditation on how we treat the things that are deemed ugly or disposable.
Which naturally flows into the concept of legacy. Charlotte physically dies, but she achieves a powerful form of immortality.
She achieves immortality through memory and through lineage. Wilbur remembers her devotion every single day. And her 514 children, though, genetically distinct from her personality, they carry on her biological mandate.
So the book strongly suggests that memory itself is a form of survival.
Absolutely. As long as Wilbur honors her sacrifice, Charlotte is not truly gone.
Yeah.
And that is a profoundly comforting idea to a child who's facing loss.
Now, let's revisit that connection to modern debates, because this is highly relevant to you, the listener. White's 1952 dilemma choosing honesty over protection stands in stark contrast to so much of today's cultural dialogue around content.
It is a striking parallel. White chose to push readers into the discomfort of death to teach a greater lesson about love. Today, we often see demands for content warnings or outright avoidance of difficult topics to ensure safe spaces.
So White's radical act was trusting the child's capacity to process complexity.
His trust feels almost countercultural today, even though we think of ourselves as a more open society than in 1952.
It seems like a core message of the book is that resilience isn't fostered by protection, but by grappling with reality in a supported environment.
Exactly, and modern research absolutely supports this. Child psychologists confirm that aggressively shielding children from discussions of death, loss, or grief can actually lead to far greater anxiety when they inevitably encounter it in real life.
So books like Charlotte's Web serve a vital therapeutic function. You called it bibliotherapy.
Yes, bibliotherapy.
Break that concept down for us. How does a story about a barn spider functionally help a child deal with, say, the divorce of their parents or the death of a pet?
It provides distance and metaphor. When a child reads about Charlotte dying, they're experiencing profound sadness, but they're doing it in a safe, fictional space. And the narrative doesn't just leave them abandoned in that sadness.
No, it immediately contextualizes it with hope.
Right, with Wilbur saving the egg sac. The child learns, through Wilbur's grief and his subsequent hope, that sadness can be productive, that loss is natural, and that one can honor the deceased through action and memory.
It's like a dress rehearsal for grief.
It's a perfect dress rehearsal for grief, led by an empathetic, simple narrative. It prepares their emotional toolkit without subjecting them to personal trauma directly.
So, by confronting death with total dignity, Charlotte provides a template for courage and acceptance that is universally applicable to any form of major life transition or loss. That's an incredibly powerful concept.
It is, which is why we have to dedicate serious time to the craft. Because the book's emotional power is inseparable from White's precision as an essayist.
This was not written with a light touch.
No. He approached Charlotte's Web with the exact same rigor he applied to defining clarity in the elements of style.
The sources confirm his obsessive perfectionism. We heard he filled dozens of notebooks, working in longhand from 4 in the morning. His dedication resulted in this incredibly low output relative to the hours he spent.
It was an extreme commitment to the prose. I mean, he might spend 8 hours and yield a single usable paragraph.
And the famous fact that he rewrote Charlotte's first appearance, her initial description, 17 times. That's not just trivia.
No, it demonstrates his pursuit of the perfect, concise description that was both biologically accurate and emotionally evocative.
Can we contrast the process? What might an earlier, less effective description have been versus the final polished product?
Well, an early draft might have been overly flowery or too anthropomorphic, something like Charlotte was a sad-eyed spider who lived a lonely life.
Sentimental and cliché.
Totally. The final version is ruthlessly honest and simple, establishing her character through action and biological reality. "Salutations," said the voice. Wilbur looked up. He saw the spider. She was a large gray spider, and she was busy mending her web. White's final choice is always clarity over embellishment. He prioritizes the natural fact.
And his wife, Catherine, played that crucial editorial role in maintaining the balance between his intellectual sophistication and the intended audience.
She was his perfect internal compass. Catherine was a renowned editor in her own right, and she had to occasionally pull him back from his instincts as a New Yorker essayist.
How so?
She would read a passage and remind him, "Remember, you're talking to children, E.B. This sounds too sophisticated," or "This passage is lecturing them." She helped him channel his elegant style into accessible language without dumbing it down.
The result is his masterful use of understatement. This is such a key literary technique for White. Give us an example of how this understatement achieves maximum emotional impact.
Consider the line you quoted earlier. She was not beautiful, but she was loyal and true. And that's more important than anything else.
Right.
A lesser writer would have spent a page describing Charlotte's beauty or her amazing deeds. White sums up her entire worth, her moral and emotional value, in one concise, profound sentence. The use of the simple words loyal and true elevates the statement because it avoids complex adjectives, making the truth universally felt.
It almost feels like a moral maxim delivered without any fanfare.
Exactly. And his refusal to make his animals humanized cartoon characters. It just grounds the story. Charlotte is a real spider. She eats real flies and insects. She behaves according to the laws of Arrhenius Cavaticus.
So when she talks, her heroism is amplified.
It is, because she remains a spider, a creature of nature, not fantasy. This commitment to accuracy, to truth, actually enhances the magic of the story.
Let's discuss the dialogue structure. If he studied how children actually spoke, what did he conclude?
He observed that when children, or indeed anyone, expresses deep, genuine emotion, fear, love, gratitude, they strip language down to its simplest components. They don't use polysyllabic words.
So a line like?
The sentence, "I'm going to save you," is the most powerful sentence in the book because of its directness. There's no hedging, no complicated syntax.
Yeah.
It's a pure statement of intent, and that understatement of emotion makes the courage palpable and believable.
And finally, the structure of the book itself mirrors his essay writing. It's not simply a meandering narrative.
No, the structure is meticulously deliberate. White moves from the minute details of life in one specific barn with one pig, one spider, to the universal.
The setting is grounded.
But the themes quickly spiral out into a meditation on life's meaning, purpose, legacy, and mortality. This essay structure, moving from observation to profound generalization, is the signature of his best adult work applied perfectly to a children's story. It gives the book a weight and a coherence that few other children's stories possess.
So, when Charlotte's Web was published in 1952, Ursula Nordstrom's fear of controversy, it was immediately realized, at least by certain segments of the public.
Oh yes. The book faced an initial shockwaves of criticism focused entirely on the morbid ending.
It was fierce.
It was. The fear wasn't that children wouldn't like it. The fear was that children would be damaged by it. I mean, one particularly memorable review in the Chicago Tribune criticized White's prose as beautiful, but argued that writers should question the wisdom of exposing young minds to such unnecessary sadness.
The idea that grief in fiction was superfluous, not vital.
Exactly. And the attempt to ban the book was real.
Tell us about that.
A vocal parents group in Massachusetts formally attempted to have the book banned from school libraries. Their specific cited reason was psychological harm to impressionable children.
Wow.
They feared that teaching children that friends die and that life is transient was emotionally damaging and just unacceptable content for a school environment. This just exemplifies the deep cultural anxiety White had tapped into.
So, how did Nordstrom, the editor who was so terrified of this outcome, counter this predictable parent backlash?
Nordstrom, knowing White was right, but also understanding the PR nightmare, launched what was, for the time, an unprecedented editorial counter-strategy for a children's book.
What did she do?
She sent advance copies not just to critics, but specifically to child psychologists, librarians, and trusted educators nationwide. She needed the professionals on her side to validate White's honesty.
And that strategy proved brilliant because the educators became the book's staunchest advocates. They confirmed his original insight.
Exactly. The professional response was overwhelmingly supportive. They reported that children were not traumatized, they were engaged. Teachers found that Charlotte's death sparked the most profound, mature, and necessary conversations they had ever had with their students about loyalty, the life cycle, and loss.
But the true emotional vindication came from the young readers themselves, didn't it?
It did. The sources detail how Harper and Brothers received floods of mail, and one letter from an 8-year-old girl perfectly summarized White's entire thesis.
What did it say?
I cried when Charlotte died, but I wasn't scared. I understood that she was a good mother and a good friend, and that made me feel better about her dying. Another child wrote that they knew Charlotte was still alive because Wilbur remembered everything she did.
That is powerful evidence. Children intuitively understood the concept of legacy and purpose, which the adults had dismissed as being too difficult for them.
They understood the essential exchange White had made, sacrificing the superficial comfort of a clean, happy ending for the deeper comfort of universal truth. This emotional intelligence from the child audience is what truly won the day and silenced the censorship attempts.
And the literary world had to acknowledge this depth. The book received the prestigious Newbery Honor in 1953.
And the citation was key. It praised the book's universal appeal, specifically highlighting its rare ability to appeal equally to adults and children without ever condescending to the latter. It validated the idea that children's literature could be high art, dealing with the grandest themes of existence. The book was cemented as a classic almost immediately due to the force of its integrity.
The moment Charlotte's Web received that critical acclaim and public adoration, it really became a turning point. It raised the standards for what children's literature was expected to be.
It did. It proved it could be serious, difficult, and beautiful art.
It fundamentally shifted the landscape. White showed that an author could tackle mortality, sacrifice, and the complexity of grief without alienating young readers. This liberated subsequent generations of authors.
It really did.
Can you name some of the authors and movements that specifically cited White's influence?
Lois Lowry, the author of The Giver, is a key example. She noted that White's radical trust in children's capacity for wisdom gave her the confidence to write about complex, dark themes like forced societal structure and euthanasia.
Wow.
The shift was profound. The literary world realized they could address serious issues, loss, war, illness, with unflinching honesty, provided the prose was clear and the framework was loving.
So White made honesty a literary virtue for the entire genre.
Absolutely. The book demonstrated that sophistication and depth were not obstacles to accessibility. They were necessary components of powerful storytelling that children deserved.
Beyond literature, the book's global reach and application are just astounding. It's been translated into dozens of languages, adapted countless times for screens and stages. But how different cultures use the book is especially insightful.
It proves the universality of White's themes. In Japan, for instance, it is often taught as an essential text purely focused on the theme of selfless friendship and devotion.
Then in Germany?
In Germany, it's integrated into curricula to discuss the ethics of animal treatment and man's relationship to nature. And perhaps most powerfully, in places like Brazil, therapists specifically use it in sessions dealing with grief management and death awareness for children.
That specific therapeutic use brings us right back to the bibliotherapy we discussed earlier. It solidifies the book's role as a tool, not just a story.
Precisely. Librarians today consistently report it as one of the most requested books for children navigating real-life family traumas, whether it's the death of a grandparent, a long-term illness, or even divorce.
And why is that?
Because the book doesn't offer easy answers, but it offers deep perspective. It frames loss within a continuum of life, sacrifice, and legacy.
As one librarian stated in our sources, when a child asks about death, Charlotte's Web gives us a way to start that conversation with hope instead of paralyzing fear.
That's it right there. The book endures because it offers comfort through truth, not through denial.
When I look back at the sources, the most enduring irony is the sheer contradiction of White's fame. The sophisticated essayist, the voice of high culture, the definitive guide to prose precision. He is globally famous for a story about a barnyard friendship.
It's the ultimate twist in a career defined by intellectual elegance.
Did White ever express disappointment that his legacy was ultimately defined by a children's book rather than his serious political and literary essays?
Never. He joked about the irony, certainly, but his reflections were always profoundly grateful. He was quoted saying something like, "If I am remembered for helping children understand that love can triumph over death, I'll consider my life well spent."
That tells you everything.
It tells you that he saw the crafting of Charlotte's Web not as a detour, but as the distillation of his entire philosophy into its purest, most necessary form.
So the profound lesson for us, for you, the listener, is White's radical respect for his young audience. He didn't just entertain them, he treated them as capable philosophical partners.
He never once talked down to them. He allowed them to grapple with the beautiful, complex reality that life contains both immense sorrow and incredible joy, and that true purpose comes from selfless love and devotion. That trust is the book's greatest gift.
If you haven't read this book since childhood, or if you're reading it to a child now, what is the key takeaway? What should you focus on?
I'd say focus on the prose. Read it slowly and appreciate the quiet heroism of Charlotte. Don't look for magical explanations. Look at the commitment to biological truth. Recognize that the magic is in the actions and the careful understatement, not in any authorial declarations.
This book is essential reading for anyone who believes literature should challenge and elevate, not just safely entertain.
It's a masterclass in profound truth delivered with devastating simplicity. A powerful reminder that great necessary art often lies just beyond the boundaries of what the status quo deems safe or appropriate.
Absolutely.
The book's most enduring and challenging lesson is ultimately about courage. And not merely the courage of Wilbur to face the butcher's knife, or Charlotte's courage to face her destiny. It's about White's courage. He risked his professional reputation to tell children the single most difficult truth about existence when the entire adult literary world was demanding that he lie.
Which raises an essential, difficult question for us today.
It does. What essential, difficult truths are we currently shielding our children from, out of our own anxiety, and what might they prove they are truly capable of understanding if we simply offer them the respect of honesty?
That is a fundamental question that makes us rethink our relationship with the stories we share. Thank you for sharing your sources and letting us take this deep dive into the truly radical, enduring heart of Charlotte's Web.
My pleasure.
We'll catch you next time.